such a good question, and I'm so glad you asked it, because the answer is that temperament doesn't change. There's been such a long debate about the role of nature and the role of nurture and which is more powerful in our development. Nature, of course, is our genetic makeup, it's our spirit, and whether or not that is more influential in determining who we are and how we are, or nurture, what family we're born into, race, socioeconomic status, which is more influential. It's so important to understand what we can change and what we can't change, because so many of us waste so much time and energy trying to change things about us that are never changeable. And so then when we don't make any headway, then you end up feeling really crappy about yourself because you keep trying to change aspects that you can't change, so then you don't change, and then you feel like a failure. Infants come into life high or low and on 9 temperament variables that cluster around and form whether you're a C, an O, an R, or an E. That will never change. So what's the role of nurture? Nurture, or those environmental factors, do certainly influence who we are. The brain is a neurological network, and an infant has billions of neurons and very few neural pathways connecting those neurons together. And literally, how our brains get wired is a co-creative process that occurs between the infant and his or her caregivers. And so how your brain got wired was determined by your interactions with your parents during those first few years of life, especially. 80% of the brain gets wired by age 3, 90% of the brain gets wired by age 5. Literally how your brain gets wired depends on what happens with your caregivers. And so then what you have is you have your primary temperament then gets wrapped in the neurological network of your brain. And so then you have this dynamic combination between your unalterable temperament and the subjective wiring of your brain, which oftentimes represents your secondary temperament type. I've worked with lots of families where I've had the opportunity to work with multiple members of the same family, and a lot of times they'll have different primary types and they'll share a secondary type because they've been raised in the same culture. A lot of times you can influence your secondary or your tertiary personality types. So you are an R. You're a primary R. You were an R when you were born, and you're going to be an R when you die. But you might be a secondary E because you were raised in a family that had kind of an E culture. Well, as you focus on habits and you direct your behavior, if you really wanted to develop C traits, you could develop C traits, and across time, that could become part of your personality. Personality being the combination of your primary temperament and your environmental influences.